Chapter 1. The Forgotten Rescue. The vast stretches of the desert planet Lyra 9 were as inhospitable as they were beautiful endless dunes of shifting sands, punctuated only by jagged, rust-colored rocks that looked as though they had been thrust up from the very core of the world itself. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still, where every breath you took felt heavy with the weight of ancient history. For most people, it was a barren wasteland, a place to be avoided unless absolutely necessary. But for Nathaniel Gray, a mechanic with no ambition beyond fixing broken ships and old machines, it was a home of sorts. He had been stranded here years ago after his cargo ship had been impounded by a corrupt spaceport authority, and since then, he had scraped out a living working in the gritty underbelly of Lyra 9's mining settlements. Nathaniel's life was simple, almost painfully so. Each day was a cycle of fixing malfunctioning engines, patching up old hulls, and dealing with the occasional mercenary or miner in need of a tune-up. He lived in a modest workshop, a converted shack on the outskirts of a town too small to bother with a name. He rarely ventured into the city itself, preferring the quiet solitude of his work. But one evening, just as the twin suns of Lyra 9 were dipping below the horizon, casting the world in a warm, reddish glow, something happened that would change his life forever, though at the time, he didn't know it. It was a strange sound that first caught his attention, a low, guttural growl that echoed across the desert. Nathaniel had grown used to the distant hum of the wind and the occasional cry of a local creature. But this was different. It was something deeper, more primal. At first, he thought it might be a wild animal or one of the many scavengers that roamed the planet. But as the sound grew louder, he realized that it was something far more unusual. His curiosity piqued. He grabbed his tools and set off toward the source of the noise. What he found was nothing short of extraordinary. There, in the shadow of a craggy outcrop, was an enormous creature, its scales gleaming white like polished ivory. It was unlike anything Nathaniel had ever seen, a massive, winged reptile with elongated, serpentine limbs and a long, sinuous tail. The creature was in distress, its wings bent at an unnatural angle, one of them clearly broken. It was thrashing weakly, its eyes wild with pain and fear. Nathaniel's heart raced as he watched the creature struggle, knowing instinctively that it was not native to Lyra 9. This was something far more ancient, more alien than any being he had ever encountered. Without hesitation, Nathaniel moved closer, his boots sinking into the soft sand with each step, his breath catching in his throat as he tried to process the sight in front of him. His mind was awash with questions, but there was no time for that now. The creature needed help. It was obvious to Nathaniel that it was in a great deal of pain, struggling to move its broken wing, but also frightened, wild, untamed fear in its eyes as it regarded him with suspicion. He paused for a moment, considering his options. Nathaniel's first instinct was to run, to flee, as any sensible person would, away from the unknown and the dangerous. But he didn't. Instead, something inside him pushed him forward. He wasn't a warrior, or a hero, or anyone of particular importance. He was just a mechanic, a man who fixed things for a living. And yet, for some reason, he couldn't bring himself to leave the creature to suffer. He had no idea how to help it, but he knew something had to be done. Taking a deep breath, Nathaniel stepped closer, moving slowly so as not to startle the creature further. It eyed him warily, its massive head turning slowly, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air around him. Nathaniel's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, but he kept his hands steady as he crouched beside the creature. His fingers brushed the dirt near its wing, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, with a strange sense of understanding, the creature stilled. Nathaniel swallowed hard, his hands shaking slightly as he examined the injury. He wasn't a doctor, he was a mechanic, and mechanics fixed machines, not living creatures. But the principles were the same, right? A broken part needed to be mended. That was what he knew. And this creature, this alien dragon, needed help. His mind clicked into gear. He rummaged through his toolkit, gathering what he could: metal plates, surgical adhesive, spare cables, and wires. He worked quickly, his hands deftly maneuvering as he fashioned makeshift supports and stabilizers for the creature's wing. It was not the kind of thing he had ever done before, but it felt instinctual. The creature didn't resist, allowing him to work, its breathing slowing just slightly as the pain was eased by his efforts. Nathaniel did what he could, binding the creature's wing, stabilizing the injury, and securing it in place with a makeshift brace. Hours passed as Nathaniel worked, the moons of Lyra, 9 rising high above the desert, casting an eerie light across the alien dragon's body. When he finally finished, he stepped back, looking at the creature as it lay quietly, breathing more evenly. It wasn't healed, not by a long shot, but it was stable, and for the first time since he had found it, the creature didn't seem quite so afraid. Nathaniel wiped the sweat from his brow and let out a long breath, exhaustion creeping into his bones. He had done it. He had saved something that shouldn't even exist on this planet. The creature didn't speak. It didn't offer thanks. But in the way it looked at him, those large, intelligent eyes, Nathaniel knew it understood. And somehow that was enough. As the desert winds began to pick up, Nathaniel rose to his feet and took a step back, knowing that he had to leave the creature to rest. He made his way back toward his workshop, feeling a strange sense of fulfillment that he couldn't quite explain. He had saved an alien dragon, and he had no idea how it would change his life. Years passed, and Nathaniel went on with his life, fixing ships and tending to the needs of the local miners. He continued working in the quiet, isolated corner of Lyra, 9, never giving much thought to the massive creature he had helped so long ago. He had other things to focus on, other problems, other jobs. He forgot about the albino dragon, the strange, magnificent creature that had once lain injured and broken in the desert. And as the years passed, he continued on his simple, predictable path, unaware that fate had already started to weave a new thread, one that would pull him back to the creature, to Lyra, 9, and to a destiny he had never imagined. The day it began was like any other, but it felt different. Nathaniel had been working on an old freighter, its hull battered and its systems struggling under the weight of years of neglect. The ship was a mess, but nothing Nathaniel couldn't fix if only the parts weren't so hard to come by. He had just finished the basic engine check and was moving on to the sensors when a sudden chill swept through the workshop. A hum resonated deep in his bones, like a distant vibration that rattled the metal around him. He paused, looking up. There was no reason for the sudden chill. No storm, no seismic activity. Yet the feeling gnawed at him, deep in his gut. Something was wrong. Nathaniel couldn't explain it. He just felt it. It was then that the signal came, a deep, resonating sound from the ship's comm system, one that was unmistakably alien. The sound was not static, nor was it anything from a frequency Nathaniel had ever encountered before. It was almost as if the signal was alive, pulsing, trying to communicate. His hands shook as he reached for the console and pressed a few buttons, trying to decode the signal. But it was more than just a technical malfunction. This was something else. A voice, a call, a plea, and then the words broke through the static. "You saved me, mechanic, and I have returned." The voice was familiar, deep, resonant, alien, but it carried a strange warmth that Nathaniel recognized. His heart skipped a beat. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. It couldn't be, but it was. It was the voice of the creature he had saved all those years ago, the albino alien dragon. The memory flooded back to him like a tidal wave, its broken wing, its fierce eyes, the way it had trusted him despite everything, the way he had forgotten about it, forgotten about her. His mind raced. How was it possible? How could she have returned after all this time? The message continued. "I am not the same. You have forgotten, but I have not. I need you." Nathaniel's pulse quickened as he looked around the workshop, unsure of what to do. He had thought the creature was a passing chapter, something strange and impossible that had come and gone. But now it seemed as if it had come back for something that involved him. His hands shook as he scrambled to answer, his mind torn between disbelief and the strange pull of destiny. But before he could respond, the message cut off, leaving nothing but the lingering hum in the air. Nathaniel sat there for a moment, frozen in place, his heart hammering in his chest. And then, without thinking, he grabbed his toolkit and bolted for the door, his mind already calculating the fastest way to reach the coordinates that had appeared on the screen. Chapter 2. The Return. The journey back to the desert was quicker than Nathaniel expected, his old freighter humming through the sandstorms of Lyra, 9 with a ferocity that seemed almost reckless. The ship rattled and groaned under the stress, but Nathaniel couldn't care less. All he could think about was what he might find. What had become of the creature after all this time? Had it truly changed, as it had said? Or was it something darker now, something that had learned to wield its power in ways he could not predict? As the freighter descended toward the familiar coordinates, Nathaniel's mind raced with questions, each one more frantic than the last. What was the creature doing here? Why had it sought him out? And what had happened to the wing that he had once healed? Was she still broken, still vulnerable, or had she become something else entirely? The ship touched down in the same spot where Nathaniel had first found her, in the shadow of the craggy outcrop. The sands were still. The wind was still. It was as if time had stood still for both the creature and himself. He stepped out of the freighter, the dust swirling around his boots, and looked toward the darkening horizon. The world around him felt strange, as though it was holding its breath. And then he saw her. She was standing in the distance, her silhouette illuminated by the fading light of the twin suns. Her once ivory scales had turned a pearlescent shade, shimmering like the surface of a pearl in the dimming light. Her wings, once broken and damaged, now appeared powerful, spread wide in a way that suggested strength and grace. She was no longer the wounded creature he had saved. She was something new, something larger, more majestic, more frightening. Yet, when she turned her head and locked eyes with him, Nathaniel saw something he had not expected. There was recognition there. There was trust. And there was something else. Something that lingered just beneath the surface of her gaze. A question. "You came back," he said, his voice thick with disbelief. You really came back." She stepped forward, her massive form moving with an elegance that seemed to defy her size. Her eyes were the same, those glowing, intelligent eyes that had once stared at him in silent gratitude. Now, there was a new understanding in them. She had learned. She had grown. "I did not forget you," she replied, her voice deep and rumbling, yet somehow softer than he remembered. "I needed you, mechanic. I need you still." Nathaniel swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. The creature, the dragon, was no longer a broken thing. She was a force, a presence. But why had she come back for him? Why now, after so many years? "I thought you'd left. That you were gone," Nathaniel muttered, looking away for a moment. The sand around them shifted in the wind, the silence stretching between them like a chasm. "I left to learn, to grow. But I cannot exist in isolation, Nathaniel. Not anymore. The universe has changed, and I have learned to change with it," she said, stepping closer. "But I am not invincible, and there is much I still do not understand." Nathaniel nodded, his heart racing in his chest as he realized the truth of her words. She wasn't invincible, and perhaps neither was he. She needed something from him, something only he could offer. "What is it you need?" he asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Her gaze softened, and for the first time since he had found her, she allowed herself to look vulnerable. "You," she said simply. "I need you. I need your hands to help me repair what has been broken. Not just my wing, but the things that have broken inside me. You are the one who saved me once. Now, you are the one I need to save me again." Nathaniel took a deep breath, understanding dawning on him like the first light of dawn. He had saved her once, yes. But now, the real work would begin. Not as a mechanic, not as a hero, but as someone who had seen the potential in something broken and given it a chance to heal. "I'm with you," he said, his voice resolute. "Let's fix it." With those simple words, "let's fix it," the bond between Nathaniel and the creature who now, with a deeper, more intimate understanding he began to think of as Vera, became something different, something stronger. He had always been good with his hands, a mechanic by trade, but now his work had taken on a new depth, a purpose that extended beyond machinery and metal. He was fixing more than a wing. He was fixing a soul that had been broken by the harshness of the universe, a soul that had been forced into the shadows of fear and legend. The work was exhausting. He spent long days repairing Vera's wing, using all the tools at his disposal. Surgical-grade tech that he had once used to repair machines now turned to more delicate work. Vera watched him as he worked, her eyes constantly scanning, learning. There was an intelligence in her that he had not expected, a sharpness that belied her outward vulnerability. It was in her silence that he began to understand. She was not just some ancient, forgotten creature. She was a survivor, a warrior, and in many ways, she was a reflection of him. But as the days stretched on, Nathaniel began to feel the weight of their situation. The desert planet that had once seemed so quiet now felt different. The air felt heavier. The stars in the sky no longer twinkled with the same indifference. There was a new sense of urgency in the air, a feeling that something was coming, a storm on the horizon. Vera felt it too. She could sense the vibrations in the ground before Nathaniel could. She could hear the distant hum of ships in orbit, ships that weren't passing by casually, but preparing for something. It was only when Nathaniel finally fixed the last of Vera's wing, when she spread it and tested its strength, that the real threat became clear. A fleet that had been tracking her for years, waiting for her to reveal herself. And now, it was too late to run. The first sign came in the form of a low hum vibration that resonated deep within the earth itself, causing the sand to tremble as though something immense were passing just beneath. Vera's wings snapped open instinctively, and she took to the air in a single, powerful thrust, her body gliding effortlessly across the desert sky, the moonlight reflecting off her scales in radiant streaks. Nathaniel ran after her, his heart pounding in his chest, wondering if they could outrun the inevitable. Vera circled above him, her movements graceful and deliberate. "They are here," she said, her voice cool and composed despite the looming threat. "I have been hunted for many cycles, Nathaniel. They will not stop until I am brought down, either dead or captured, and they will not hesitate to destroy this world in their pursuit." Nathaniel stopped in his tracks, staring up at the sky, trying to comprehend the gravity of what she had just said. "Who are they? What do they want with you?" "They are the Dominion," Vera said, her voice tinged with a quiet bitterness. "A powerful, ruthless collective that controls entire sectors of space. I was once a part of their forces until I broke free. They do not tolerate defection." Nathaniel's thoughts raced. He had saved her, yes, but he hadn't realized the kind of danger he had invited into his life by doing so. He had thought that once Vera's wing was healed, she would leave, continue on her way, and that would be the end of it. But now, it seemed, there was no going back. The galaxy was hunting her, and by extension, hunting him as well. "You're not alone in this," Nathaniel said, his voice filled with determination. "We'll figure something out. We'll find a way to stop them." Vera glanced down at him, the faintest trace of a smile flickering in her eyes. "We may not have the luxury of time, Nathaniel, but thank you." Chapter 3. The Pursuit. The pursuit began almost immediately. It wasn't just the ships that descended into Lyra 9's atmosphere, their massive hulls blotting out the stars. It was the overwhelming sense of inevitability. The Dominion had a way of making you feel as though you were already defeated, as though your fate had been sealed the moment they turned their eyes upon you. The first wave came with efficiency. A flotilla of sleek ships, designed not for diplomacy, but for subjugation. They didn't announce their arrival with a battle cry. They simply appeared. Their engines whispered through the void, their weapons primed, their sensors active, scouring the terrain below for any sign of Vera's presence. Nathaniel and Vera had no intention of hiding. The time for that had long passed. They needed to act. But with every passing moment, the pressure mounted. Nathaniel was just a mechanic, a simple man who had stumbled into something much bigger than himself. Vera, on the other hand, was far more than she appeared. She was the key to a war long since forgotten, a war that the Dominion wanted to win at any cost. They made their way to the underground hideout Vera had kept for emergencies, a secluded cave system deep within the heart of Lyra 9's largest mountain range. It was an ancient refuge, a place built long before Nathaniel had arrived, hidden from even the most advanced of scans. The only thing that stood between them and the incoming fleet now was time and how quickly they could prepare. "Time is not on our side, Nathaniel," Vera said, her voice low, focused. She moved with precision, her wings folded tightly against her body as she worked alongside him, helping him secure the remaining systems. Nathaniel didn't speak much, his thoughts preoccupied with the preparations. The Dominion had underestimated him once, thinking him just a mechanic with no greater purpose. But they would soon learn they were wrong. It was when the first drone strike hit the surface that the urgency became unbearable. The shockwave rattled the ground, and dust billowed into the air, as if the planet itself was trembling in fear. The first few ships of the Dominion had arrived. They weren't here for diplomacy. They weren't here for a conversation. They were here to hunt. "They're close," Vera said, her eyes scanning the skies, her senses heightened. "They'll be here soon." Nathaniel glanced at the systems, then at her. "Then we make our stand here," he said, determination in his eyes. "We fight. We don't give them an inch." Vera nodded, the flicker of approval in her eyes. "I will fight by your side, Nathaniel. You have earned that much." As the sun set behind them, casting long shadows across the desert, they prepared for the final confrontation. The Dominion had no idea what they were walking into. The first wave of Dominion ships hit with a deafening roar, their sleek hulls slicing through the air as they descended with terrifying precision. Nathaniel's heart pounded in his chest, the sound of his pulse almost louder than the incoming barrage of artillery fire. He and Vera had fortified the cave as best as they could, using whatever materials they could find: scrap metal, spare parts, old systems they scavenged from the planet's abandoned colonies. It wasn't much, but it had to be enough. Vera's presence in the cave, her energy, seemed to make the ground beneath them hum, vibrating with an ancient power, and Nathaniel felt something stir deep within himself, an urge to protect, to defend, something primal that rose in him when the Dominion's threat became real. The first explosions rocked the cave entrance, shaking the ground beneath them, sending plumes of dust and debris flying into the air. Nathaniel staggered, but Vera stood tall, her wings unfurling slightly as she gathered herself. The sound of the explosion reverberated in her bones, and she looked at Nathaniel, her eyes flashing with something new, something fierce, something resolute. "They're coming," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We must hold the line." Nathaniel nodded, grabbing the blasters they had set up in place, his hands moving quickly to adjust their firepower. He had never been a fighter, never been a soldier, but in that moment, as the Dominion's ships continued their assault, something shifted in him. He had no intention of letting them take Vera, and he would fight with everything he had to protect her. The Dominion's forces were well coordinated, their strike precise. They had come prepared, their ground forces already beginning to sweep across the desert landscape, scanning for any sign of resistance. But they had underestimated something crucial: the bond between Nathaniel and Vera. They were not just a human and an alien. They were a force, working in sync, complementing each other in a way that no one could have predicted. As the Dominion forces closed in on the cave entrance, Vera took to the air, her wings sweeping through the dust-filled sky with a roar that shook the very air around them. She was no longer the wounded creature Nathaniel had once helped. She was a dragon alive, powerful, and ready to fight. She dove into the fray, her wings cutting through the air with precision, her tail lashing out with deadly force. Nathaniel followed her lead, firing his blasters with deadly accuracy, covering Vera as she struck down enemy after enemy. He had no idea what he was doing, but his instincts guided him, each shot landing where it needed to, each movement a perfect complement to Vera's own. The Dominion forces were formidable, but they hadn't anticipated the ferocity of the creature they were hunting or the determination of the human at her side. The battle raged on for hours, the ground around them becoming a battlefield littered with debris and the wreckage of destroyed ships. The Dominion's forces were relentless, but they hadn't anticipated the resilience of Lyra 9's desert and the power of the bond between Nathaniel and Vera. With each strike, they grew stronger. With each step, they pushed the Dominion forces back. And then, just as the enemy forces seemed to regroup, Vera unleashed her final strike. She called upon an ancient power deep within herself, a power she had once used to tear down empires and conquer worlds. With a roar that echoed through the desert, she unleashed a blast of pure energy from her core, sending shockwaves through the air and tearing apart the Dominion's command ship. In that moment, the battle was over. The Dominion's forces scattered, retreating into the skies, their plans shattered, their power broken. Nathaniel stood among the wreckage, covered in dust and sweat, but with a sense of victory that resonated deep within him. Vera landed beside him, her wings folding neatly at her sides as she regarded him with a look that spoke volumes. "We did it," Nathaniel said, his voice hoarse but filled with a sense of pride. Vera nodded, her gaze softening as she reached out to touch his arm. "We did." But as the battle subsided and the dust began to settle, they both knew something deeper had changed. They were no longer just two individuals thrown together by fate. They were a team, bound by something more powerful than circumstance. In that moment, Nathaniel knew that no matter what came next, he would face it with Vera by his side. They had faced down the impossible, and they had emerged victorious. But the Dominion had not forgotten them. The war was far from over. The galaxy had seen them fight, and it was only a matter of time before the next battle would begin. As they stood amidst the wreckage, Nathaniel turned to Vera, his eyes filled with determination. "This is just the beginning." Vera met his gaze, her eyes glowing with the same resolve. "Yes," she agreed. "But whatever comes, we will face it together." Chapter 4: The Legacy. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy began to hear the story of Nathaniel and Vera, of the mechanic who had saved the dragon and the dragon who had saved a world. News of their victory against the Dominion spread like wildfire, and despite the retreat of the enemy, their legacy became the symbol of hope for the oppressed sectors of space. They were not just survivors. They were the spark that ignited a revolution. Vera and Nathaniel traveled together, not as fugitives, but as leaders. They went from world to world, rallying those who had suffered under the Dominion's rule. Nathaniel, once a simple mechanic, became a symbol of resilience, a man who had stood against impossible odds and won. Vera, the mighty albino dragon, became a beacon of strength, her power unmatched by anything the Dominion had ever seen. But as the revolution spread, they knew their enemies would regroup, that they would return. The Dominion's fleet was vast, and their hunger for control would never cease. The fight was far from over. But Nathaniel and Vera had something the Dominion could never understand: each other. And that bond, forged in the heat of battle and the quiet moments of trust, was unbreakable. The day came when the final confrontation would occur. The Dominion had gathered their forces for one last stand. The battle would decide the fate of the galaxy. As Nathaniel and Vera stood on the precipice of destiny, they knew they would face it together. "No matter what happens," Nathaniel said, his hand resting on Vera's massive, gleaming form, "we've already won. Because we did this together." Vera looked down at him, her eyes filled with pride and something deeper, a connection that could not be broken by weapons or time. "Together," she agreed. And so, they faced the storm that would change the galaxy forever, not as a mechanic and a dragon, but as a force that would never be forgotten.